The night was quiet, but the air was electric with tension. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was lying in my hotel room in Colorado, trying to get some rest, when the phone rang. It was Elvis. His voice was clear and calm, like he hadn't touched a thing. "Red, I need you to come to my room. There's something I want to talk to you about," he said. My heart racing, I jumped out of bed and headed straight to his room. When I got there, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, and there he was, lying on the floor, completely out of it. I thought to myself, oh well, he must have taken something. Without thinking, I undressed him and carried him to the bed. I laid him down, covered him up, and made sure he was comfortable. I figured he just needed some sleep. But later, as I was lying in my own bed, it hit me. When Elvis spoke to me on the phone, he sounded completely straight. And it took me less than a couple of minutes to get to his room. No drug hits that hard. That's when I realized he was wide awake, just testing me, just to see how loyal I would be. Elvis was always testing us. He wanted to know if we were really dedicated to him. And in those days, there was very little any one of us wouldn't have done for him. The next day, I saw him at breakfast. He looked at me with that sly grin, knowing exactly what I had done, but he never said a word. It was just one of those unspoken things between us. We were part of his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, and loyalty was everything. Elvis was a complex guy. He had his moments of charm and kindness, but he also had his moments of suspicion and testing. He could be demanding, but he was also generous. He had a way of making you feel special, like you were the only one in the world. But he also had a way of keeping you on your toes, never quite sure what he was thinking. I remember the first time he talked about Priscilla. He met her in Germany when he was in the army. She was just a young girl, barely 15, but Elvis saw something in her. He kept talking about her, more and more as the weeks went by. He even wrote her a letter, which was a big deal for him. He was always on the phone with her, and it seemed like he was really serious about her. When he arranged for her to visit over Christmas, 1960, we were all curious. We didn't know what to expect. I mean, a 15-year-old girl in Memphis. But when she walked into Graceland, we were all blown away. She looked older, more mature, and she had this easy way about her. She fit in perfectly with us, and we all agreed that she was the real deal. Priscilla was different from the other girls. She came from a military family, and she had a sophistication that the other girls didn't have. She was smart, and she knew how to handle herself. Elvis was really taken with her, and he made it clear that he wanted to be with her. He even talked to her dad, Captain Beaulieu, and convinced him to let her move to Memphis. Those early days at Graceland were the best. Elvis was making a ton of money, and he was all about spending it on us. He bought Priscilla a horse, and then he bought one for his cousin Patsy so they could ride together. Of course, he had to get himself one too. And when he saw us looking at them, he decided we all needed horses. So he bought each of us a horse, and we all became cowboys. We even had our own ranch across the Mississippi, called Rising Sun. It was a beautiful place, with a lake and rolling hills. Elvis went all out, buying us chaps and cowboy hats, and even some prime cattle from King Ranch. He was on a buying spree, getting trucks for all of us. I remember one time, a surveyor was there, and Elvis just gave him a 3-haul truck. No questions asked. The guy nearly fainted. Those were the days. We were living it up, and Elvis was at the center of it all. But even then, I could see that he was testing us, always trying to figure out who he could really trust. And I knew that no matter what, I would always have his back. Alan Fortas told me a funny story about Elvis. They were standing in front of the ranch, and a bunch of truck salesmen were there. Elvis went out with Alan, looked at all the trucks, and said, "Take your pick," pointing to the ranch trucks. Alan replied, "But I already have one." Elvis then looked at a salesman, who he didn't even know was a salesman, and said, "Well, give it to him." Alan patiently said, "But he's got one, too." Elvis looked at Alan like he was nuts and said, "Well, hell, man, find some son of Fabbage to give it to." This kind of thing happened all the time. Show him something, and he would buy it for someone. The Memphis Mafia, about 10 of us led by Red and me, would hang out at the ranch all day, racing horses, drag racing our trucks, and taking little white pills that Elvis handed out. But the sad part was that we had to go home at night and leave behind this amazing toil. And Red told me that Elvis stayed in a nice brick cottage in the northwest corner of the ranch. One day, one of the salesmen sold Elvis a trailer, not just any trailer, but a beautiful 3-bedroom trailer that was more like a house. In those days, it cost over $15,000. That started a trend. Elvis bought 8 trailers, had them lined up, and even had a guy put concrete under them and connect gas lines to make them permanent. We all moved in. Some of us even brought our wives. It was incredible. We raced horses all day, played with all his guns, and Elvis had a beautiful gold Palomino horse named Sun. Seeing him ride that horse while all pilled up was like watching Lee Marvin in Cat Ballou. It was a blast. Long before communes were a thing, Elvis wanted us to have a commune, a place where we could have all the fun in the world and not be bothered by anyone. He wanted a sort of Garden of Eden, an ideal community. He was very happy there, and so were we. After buying horses, trucks, and trailers, Elvis decided he needed a tractor. First, he got a small one, but that wasn't powerful enough. Then he got a full-size farm tractor. We would put a saddle on the tractor and ride it around like madmen. Sometimes a rider would get bucked off, and we would all run after the tractor, which had suddenly become a driverless runaway machine. We were all pilled up and a bit crazy, but it was all in good fun. Elvis was like a kid in a candy store, always wanting to buy more. Red remembers that Elvis came to his wedding half an hour late, with 2 guns in his waistband. We all thought it was a bit of a joke. Anything Elvis did, we laughed at. The spending sprees never stopped, and Elvis always paid in cash. His dad Vernon would gasp when he got those bills, but Elvis would just laugh and say, "Hell man, there's plenty more where that came from." Unlike other entertainers, Elvis didn't make fancy tax shelters for himself. He always let the IRS figure out his tax return, and was probably the biggest individual taxpayer in the country. Red recalls that Elvis was always amazed by the case of Joe Louis, the boxer who made millions but ended up broke and owing the IRS a fortune. "That ain't going to happen to me, man," Elvis would say. You must understand that while Elizabeth Taylor got $1 million for her movies, Elvis was getting that for most of his pictures. That money was just piling up in the bank into millions. Elvis couldn't spend it fast enough. A lot of the spending sprees happened after a pill-taking spree. Red said it was like a compulsion burning inside Elvis. It started with buying a horse and ended with buying the ranch. When we weren't at Rising Sun or Graceland, we hung out with Elvis in Hollywood while he was making films. In 1966, Elvis took us to Los Angeles and rented a huge place on Rocca Place in Bel Air. Priscilla was living with him on and off. One night, I was driving Elvis in his custom-made Rolls-Royce limousine. It was a beautiful, warm, clear night. Elvis suddenly said, "This would be a great night to be driving a convertible." Bang, that was it. He told me to turn around and go to Hillcrest Motor Company on Wilshire Boulevard. We got out, and there was this beautiful, solid black Cadillac convertible. Elvis wanted a baby blue one, but the dealer referred us to another dealer, Lou Ayler's, further down on Wilshire. Elvis walked into the sales office while I parked the car. When I parked, Elvis was coming out with a set of keys. He walked over to me and said, "What do you think of that one, Sonny?" I said, "God Almighty, that is beautiful." I thought he was going to buy it, but he handed me the keys and said, "It's yours." I backed away and said, "No way, boss, no way. Oh no, I don't want you to do that." Elvis just laughed and said, "Come on, Sonny, I want to give it to you." I told him, "It seems like you're always giving things to us, and we're always taking and never giving anything back." He said, "You're giving when you don't know you're giving. I've always had reports about you, Sonny, how you always speak up for me when I'm not around and never put me down. So I want you to have it, man. You deserve it." I ended up accepting it. It was a beautiful car. Elvis then canceled his baby blue convertible and got a solid black one instead. "I guess a baby blue one would be nice, but a car should always be black or white," he said. Elvis had moved on from the pink stage and only wanted black or white cars. The next day at Rocca Place, it was chaos. Everyone was talking about their new cars. Even the tough guys were emotional. On this occasion, I don't think it was fair to say Elvis gave out all those gifts because he was high on pills. It was a genuine, generous gesture. Elvis said, Man, when we were all poor kids in Memphis, there wasn't one of us who didn't say that one day we would have a Cadillac convertible. It was our dream. Well, now we have our dream come true. When I think back to that, I still get choked up because he was really giving. Before the Cadillacs, there were the motorcycles. He bought 12 in one order. The store was so surprised, they demanded a phone number to call back, thinking the order might be a hoax. On top of the motorcycles, Elvis bought a customized Greyhound bus for the whole gang. All through this time, Priscilla Beaulieu was growing up and growing into a mature woman. She wasn't satisfied with being Elvis's girlfriend. She wanted marriage. Her parents were calling Elvis, politely asking if he intended to behave honorably. Colonel Tom Parker wasn't too happy either. He had manipulated the press beautifully, but how long would it last? For everyone's sake, Colonel Tom wanted Elvis and Priscilla to get married. Elvis had a long string of romances with well-known and not so well-known actresses. Red and I remember overhearing several heated scenes between Elvis and Priscilla. Red said they had fights like any normal couple, but she had a mind of her own. She had suspicions that he was running around with other women, but she never really caught him in the act. She wasn't going to be made a fool of. I remember a big fight at the rented Bel Air home on Rocca Place. It was around the same time Elvis was buying us cars and things. I always got the feeling that Priscilla didn't like us hanging around as much as we did. She never said anything, but I guess she had arguments about him spending more time with the boys than with her. The argument was a beauty. Elvis was ranting and she was screaming. We were a few rooms away, but you could hear furniture and things falling. Elvis came out extremely calm and said, I just told her to pack all her stuff and get the fuck out. He was helping her pack, throwing her clothes onto the floor. She was all packed, and then he walked in and said, Now unpack, Goddammit, you're not going anywhere. He told us later, women can get you by the balls, you know. He could make a person feel very insecure with that sort of stuff. He did it to us all the time, making us think we weren't as close as we might have thought. It was a reverse psychology thing. Both Red and I believed that Elvis was keeping Priscilla off balance, so she would get used to the treatment when they got married. There's no doubt in our minds that Elvis intended to get married, but he wasn't in any great hurry. We never really got close to Priscilla. Not that she was standoffish, she wasn't. She was extremely pleasant. But we respected her position and didn't want to exaggerate our presence to a woman who might want more of Elvis to herself. Besides, we were having too much fun. When Elvis first took over Graceland, there was a ritual that every New Year and every July 4th, he would put on these fireworks displays. They weren't so much displays as they were fireworks wars. Elvis would divide us into two sides, dress us in gloves, football helmets, and motorcycle helmets, set us about 20 yards apart, and let the fireworks fly. Red and I marvel that nobody was ever seriously injured, but we would level rockets and Roman candles at each other and blast away for hours. I've backed into burning rockets and had my ass burned half off. I've seen Elvis bending over a giant rocket, and it went off while he was leaning over it, nearly blowing his head off. Sonny carries a scar on his chest to this day where one of us tried to blow a rocket through him. Roman candles would blow up in our hands. The house caught fire twice in these battles, and one time Sonny had to knock a wall down with a sledgehammer to get a hose to the fire. Vernon Presley would look on with horror. He would just gasp with horror at our antics, Red says, but Elvis was just having fun. Whatever would happen, he would say, give Daddy the bill, and there would be poor old Vernon going white. Old Vernon can be pretty tight with a buck, whereas Elvis just never thought about the price of anything. It was hilarious to see Vernon clap his hands to his head when he saw the spending and the damage and the waste and say, oh lordy. He could be a very funny dude without trying. On one particular fireworks night, Vernon was the star of the show. Elvis had bought little explosive pellets that you threw on the ground, and they would explode. Or you could put them under someone's feet, and they would explode when they stamped on them. Vernon came into the kitchen, and there was a little bowl of these things on the table. They looked a bit like M&M's candies. Vernon was talking to us and reached behind him, thinking he was grabbing candies. He threw them in his mouth, and they exploded. The look on his face was priceless. Smoke was coming out of his mouth, and he couldn't speak. His lips were numbed by the shock, and he didn't know what he did wrong. When we realized he wasn't hurt, we died laughing. To this day, when I picture that scene, I nearly collapse. Vernon used to tell that story, and when he told it, it was even funnier. The fireworks wars, like the fairground and the skating rink, were ways for Elvis to play out teenage fantasies he could never afford when he was younger. One such fantasy, according to Red, was the compulsion to knock something down or smash it to pieces. I remember after we all moved out to Graceland and to the farm across the Mississippi border, there was a nice, neat wooden house, 3 bedrooms, built into the northeast corner of Graceland. This is where his uncle Travis Smith, the gatekeeper, used to live. Well, as soon as Elvis got these trailers for everybody, he just got it into his mind that he was going to wipe the cottage off the face of the earth. There was no reason to, because it was a real nice house, but Elvis said it had to go. The morning after the big decision, Presley got on his little bulldozer, but it was clear it wasn't going to cut it. So he rented a big, full-size bulldozer. Red and we got into our bulldozers, and I put on a football helmet for safety. I remember this day because Vernon, Presley's dad, was dozing off in a rocking chair on the porch. Presley started up the big bulldozer and yelled to Vernon, "You better move, Daddy." Vernon asked why, and Presley said, "Because I'm going to knock the Gotham house down." Vernon just gave one of those looks like, "Oh Lordy," but he didn't say anything. He knew better. So he got up, and Presley started roaring away. We lit the house on fire, and it was blazing like crazy. I was in the little bulldozer, and Presley was in the big one, pushing me toward the burning house. He was laughing his ass off, having a great time. In less than an hour, we had the whole thing knocked down, and it was burning up a storm. As the house went up in smoke, we heard a fire engine. A fireman stuck his head over the fence and asked what we were doing. Presley looked at him with a face that said it was a dumb question and said, "We're burning down a house." The fireman asked how, and Presley said, "With a damn match." The fireman wanted to know why Presley hadn't called the fire department, and Presley ended it by saying, "Fuck you." That was the end of the house and the argument. He had satisfied his fantasy. Presley often told me about a similar fantasy. He wanted to get a big crane with a wrecking ball and demolish a giant building. He really wanted the power to build and destroy at his whim. In Hollywood mansions, movie locations, Graceland, and the big spread in Mississippi, Presley and the Memphis Mafia were living out the childhood dreams we had nurtured for years. We had money, homes, horses, cars, tractors, fireworks, and guns to make it all real. There were very few crosswords, and everyone got along like one big happy family. Presley did have his outbursts of temper and his eccentricities, but what superstar didn't? The marriage was looming on the horizon. Colonel Beaulieu and Colonel Parker were going to get their way. For Red West, the marriage triggered the first real rift between him and Presley. It was between the movies Clambake and Speedway, and I was living in Beverly Glen in Los Angeles. I was doing stunts and fight scenes in the movies for Elvis when we were told about the wedding. As always, there was a meeting, and I was called to get ready to go to Las Vegas. We all flew down, and I brought my wife, Pat. We checked into the Aladdin Hotel in Vegas. I was waiting in my room, and nothing was happening. No phone calls. So I went to Joe Esposito's room, and he opened the door all dressed up in his tux. I asked what was going on, and he told me, "You all aren't going to the wedding. You're going to the reception. Marty and I will be there, but you will all be at the reception." I lost it. I was really pissed. The man brings us all the way to Las Vegas, and then we're not invited to the wedding. I went back to my room and told Pat, and she broke down and cried. I was hurt. I thought we were close. I stayed in the room and heard about the marriage on TV. They were married by a Supreme Court justice in a room at the Aladdin. I didn't go to the reception. I just wanted to get back to Los Angeles. I didn't even have money, so I borrowed $50 from a Memphis jeweler who was there to lay on the ring. I caught the same flight as the wedding party, but didn't say a word to anyone. I ignored Elvis for a month. He got on another plane with Danny Kaye, the comedian, and they went to Palm Springs for their honeymoon. Sonny was in Los Angeles working on a movie, and he felt it was a lousy deal. It was a big thing in my life, like not getting invited to your brother's wedding. I called Charlie Hodge at the hotel where they were staying and asked what happened. Elvis was there and got on the phone. We had a heated argument, but eventually cooled down. After the honeymoon, Presley decided to go to the Bahamas. He thought it would be like Las Vegas, but he didn't like it. He was disturbed by what he believed was the tense racial situation. So they went to Hawaii with Priscilla, Joe Esposito, and Jerry Schilling. Presley wanted to go to Europe, but the colonel dissuaded him. In Hawaii, they attended a big karate tournament organized by Ed Parker. I worked with Ed in karate, and there was a young champion named Mike Stone. Presley met him and congratulated him on his performance. After the marriage, Presley, while affectionate and attentive, kept Priscilla away from his immediate work. She would come on location sometimes, but Presley had a lot of extracurricular activities. He would give the girls the cold shoulder whenever Priscilla was around, Sonny said. He gave Priscilla a lot of respect, but Elvis wanted to have his cake and eat it too. In the beginning, the wives would come along on tours. For a 4-week engagement in Vegas, the wives would come for the opening weekend, and every weekend until he closed. Priscilla was there with the wives and girlfriends, but as time went on, Elvis cut it down. By the end of their marriage, in 1971 to 1972, he only brought the wives and girlfriends for the opening. Sometimes he wouldn't bring Priscilla at all. This put a strain on everyone. Joe Esposito's and Jerry Schilling's marriages broke up. My wife, Judy, and I separated in 1975. It was my fault for neglecting her, but the separation contributed to it. Presley and the guys who weren't married took advantage of their position. We had girls coming out of our ears. One time, in 1970, we had a bunch of girls down in Palm Springs. After a few days, we went to Las Vegas. Priscilla and one of the wives went a week later and found fan mail thanking us for a great time. Priscilla confronted Elvis, and he laughed it off. But later, she told the story to my wife, Judy, and it put a strain on our relationship. There was tension between Priscilla and Judy, and one day they were at each other's throats. Elvis and I had to calm them down. In January 1972, Presley was halfway through his act at the Hilton International Hotel when he introduced a rich record producer and his bodyguard, Mike Stone. Presley remembered Mike from the karate tournament in Hawaii. The producer was boasting about Mike, saying he was a real killer. Mike was quiet, and it was embarrassing. We were all uncomfortable. Presley finally cut off the conversation by saying, "Karate don't beat a gun, man." Mike smiled and agreed. After the show, we cornered Mike and talked about karate. Presley wanted Priscilla to learn karate, and it was agreed that Mike would give her lessons at Chuck Norris's studio. Presley invited Mike up to the Hilton with other karate experts, and they showed some films of a tournament in Japan. I remember the time when things started to get a bit complicated with Priscilla and Mike Stone. Stone was always so quiet and humble, and at first, he and Priscilla just seemed to be getting along as student and teacher. But over time, things changed. Red, one of the guys in Elvis's crew, started to hear whispers from the maids. They said they were seeing Stone at the house more often than they should have. Red was pretty sure they were having a romance and even made a bet with Joe Esposito about it. Red won that bet. Sonny, another one of the guys, noticed it too. One day, Elvis needed to reach Priscilla, and Sonny tried to call her at the karate studio, but she wasn't there. He even called a karate tournament, but no luck. Sonny had a feeling something was up, so he tried to buy some time. When Priscilla finally came home, Sonny told her Elvis was looking for her. She got the message and went to see Elvis. She told him she was at a karate tournament, and Elvis, being the trusting guy he was, didn't question her. The guys in the crew were loyal to both Elvis and Priscilla. We understood what she was going through, because Elvis wasn't spending much time with her. A few weeks later, it became clear to us that Priscilla and Stone were getting closer. One night in Las Vegas, Priscilla finally told Elvis it was over. She had the courage to be honest, even though she could have kept it a secret. She didn't want to make a fool of Elvis. After the show, Elvis called us all into his room. He told us, "Another man has taken my wife." We were all shocked, and the room was quiet. Elvis was visibly shaken. He had always tried to give Priscilla her freedom, but he never imagined it would lead to this. Red later told me that Elvis didn't know it was Stone until Red pointed it out. Elvis was shocked and hurt. In 1972, they officially separated, and in 1973, they got divorced. Despite everything, Elvis and Priscilla remained respectful to each other. Elvis even left the divorce proceedings with his arm around her. Some people think they still love each other, but only they know for sure. Around the same time, Elvis was really into karate and collecting badges. One night in 1970, we were at a Hollywood restaurant, and a famous celebrity showed Elvis a Federal Narcotics Bureau badge. Elvis was impressed and wanted one for himself. He asked our private investigator friend, John O'Grady, to help him get one. O'Grady set up a meeting with John Finlater, a deputy narcotics director. Elvis went to the meeting alone, dressed in his usual flashy style, and offered to donate money to the anti-drug campaign. Finlater couldn't accept the money, but he offered Elvis an honorary badge. Elvis wanted the real thing, though, and he was determined to get it. A few days later, Elvis did something completely out of character. He went to the White House and handed a note to a security guard. Next thing I knew, Jerry called me in Memphis and told me to come to Washington right away. I got on the first plane and met Elvis and Jerry at a hotel. We were going to see the President of the United States. We were picked up by a limousine and taken to the White House. Elvis went in first with Bud Krogh, and Jerry and I went to the Federal Building. We were excited, but didn't know if we'd actually meet the President. A few minutes later, we got a call saying the President would see us. We walked into the Oval Office, and it was like a dream. The President was friendly and gave us key rings and cufflinks with the presidential seal. Elvis was proud and told us, "Who said something can't be done?" The President made sure Elvis got his Federal Narcotics badge. It was a big deal for Elvis, and he even used it once. There was a guy named Bill. His real name isn't important, who worked for Elvis. Bill was always talking about guns and trying to act tough. Elvis put him on the payroll, but Red and Sonny were a bit worried about him. Bill was a bit too eager to be part of the crew, and we weren't sure if he was the right fit. That's how things were back then. Elvis was dealing with personal issues, and still trying to make a difference in the world. It was a crazy time, but we were all in it together. It was a wild time in Vegas. The boys were all staying at the Hilton, and Presley was in a generous mood. He gave everyone a bonus, and Fetch'em Bill got $500. But the moment he got the money, he lost it gambling. Bill started complaining loudly that someone had stolen his bonus. Presley, being the kind-hearted guy he was, decided to give Bill another $500, but things didn't stay good for long. Soon, Fetch'em Bill was suspected of forging Elvis's name on some of his personal checks. That was bad enough, but then things got even worse. Several of Elvis's rings went missing, and one of them was a really special one, a $19,000, 30-carat sapphire ring. Elvis didn't care much about it, but he was really upset about another ring, a big karate ring he had. We looked everywhere for it, but it was nowhere to be found. We talked to Bill about it, but he said he didn't know anything. Then, out of nowhere, Bill said he found the sapphire ring in his briefcase. He said he had forgotten he put it there for safekeeping. Elvis didn't buy it, but he didn't say anything. A day later, we found the karate ring next to the laundry chute, inside some pipes. It was clear that Bill was involved. Elvis was fuming. He wanted to know where Bill was. Someone told him Bill was leaving for Memphis at 11, and it was already 10. Elvis jumped up and said, "We're going to the airport right now to get that sonophage." Presley, Red, and a hotel security guard rushed downstairs and jumped into a car. I, Sonny, chased after them in another car. When we got to the airport, we saw a big jet about to take off. Elvis thought Bill was on it. He raced onto the tarmac, ran up to the cockpit, and flashed the Federal Narcotics badge President Nixon had given him. The pilot, who recognized Elvis, lowered the gangplank. Elvis tore through the plane looking for Bill, but couldn't find him. He raced off the plane, and the pilot took off, probably wondering what the hell just happened. Meanwhile, I found Bill in the lobby. I got him out to the car and went through his suitcase. All I found was a .357 Magnum gun, which I took from him. Just then, Elvis, Red, and the security guard came up. Elvis flashed his badge at Bill and started to read him his rights, but he couldn't remember all the words. He just said, "Get the fuck in the car." We took Bill back to the hotel. Elvis was waiting in his suite, and he was livid. Red and I sat on either side of Bill, and Red had a gun trained on him. Elvis started screaming at Bill, who was stupid enough to talk back. That just made Elvis angrier. After a while, Elvis calmed down and started talking to Bill calmly. We all felt sorry for Bill, but Elvis, after he got it out of his system, was the one who felt the most sorry for him. He even talked about hiring Bill back, but we talked him out of it because we saw a lot of problems with having Bill around. Finally, Elvis said, "Go on, fetch him, go back to Memphis. Nobody is going to bother you anymore. Just keep your mouth shut." When we last heard, Bill was working at a gas station. A few months later, in February 1976, Red was summoned to Elvis's bedroom at Graceland. He was shocked to see a huge arsenal of guns on the floor. Elvis handed Red a list of names and some photos of Memphis drug dealers. He said, "These sons of bitches need to be wiped out." Elvis had it all planned out. He wanted Red, Dave Hebler, and Dick Grob to lure these guys, and then Elvis would kill them. Dave and I were stunned. We tried to talk him out of it, but he was dead set. He said the cops wanted these guys, and he wanted to get back at a guy who had hit his stepbrother Ricky with a pool cue. He said he wanted to kill this guy personally. The rest, he said, he would give a chance to surrender. I told him it was a bad idea, but he didn't like hearing that. He was into this cop stuff, and didn't care about the album he was supposed to be recording. He wanted to go out on a death wish mission, while the musicians were working downstairs. He even had a plan to sneak out, make the hit, and come back without anyone knowing. One night, Elvis told us he was going on a drug bust with a Memphis narc cop. He put on a ridiculous outfit jumpsuit, snowsuit, ski mask, and a hat with a cigar. He looked like a neon sign. We had to pretend we were laughing about something else to keep from breaking down. The drug bust was a mess. The cops grabbed the suspects, but one of them tried to escape, and a cop's foot got run over. Elvis just gave the suspects his Dirty Harry look, and that was it. Elvis's imagination was always running wild. On a trip to Vail, Colorado, he told us he had been on a drug raid in Denver and had taken down a guy with a karate chop. He told the story differently each time, and we all knew it was a fantasy. But Elvis didn't seem to care. He was living in his own world, and we just went along with it. One time in Memphis, we were in Elvis's Cadillac, and we saw a police car with its sirens on. Elvis made a U-turn and followed the cop car to a gas station. The station had been robbed, and a guy came up to Elvis, saying his wife had been beaten up. Elvis, being the protector, said he would take care of it. He wrote down the names and details, and told Red and me to find the guys and beat them up. We found the woman, and it turned out she was lying. Her husband had made up the story. We told Elvis, and he was disappointed we didn't play the role of Avengers. Elvis had a strong urge to protect people, but it often led to some wild and unrealistic ideas. He wanted to be a super cop, a Robin Hood, and a hero. But sometimes, it was just a fantasy he couldn't let go of. Elvis wanted me to take care of a guy who was bothering the girlfriend of his stepbrother, Billy Stanley. He told me to whip up on the guy. I went to this house with Elvis, Billy, and Lamar. I didn't want any guns around if it got physical, so I handed my gun to Lamar. When we got there, the guy was big, but he was a slob. His dad came out and told his son to get back inside. It was embarrassing, and I felt bad for getting involved. Red West, another one of Elvis's guys, had a similar story. He remembered a time when Billy and Ricky, Elvis's stepbrothers, told Elvis they got beaten up by a motorcycle gang. Elvis wanted it taken care of. Red, Jerry Schilling, and Bill Wallace, a karate champion, went to the gang's house. The guys were ready with guns and knives. One guy pointed a deer-hunting rifle at Red. Red convinced the guy that his friend outside had a gun pointed at his head, which was a trick. The guy got scared and made a mess. Red and Jerry took control, and the situation got diffused. Red decided he wouldn't do these things for the Stanley boys again. It was too dangerous. Elvis really wanted to be a movie star, but he never felt like he achieved that. He made 33 movies, but they were all the same, just in different places. Fans loved them, and they made a lot of money. Elvis didn't like that Hollywood didn't take him seriously. He thought his talent wasn't fully used. After Elvis came back from the army, he started working on a movie called G.I. Blues. That's when the Memphis Mafia really came together, Sonny, Joe, Lamar, Gene, and I were all there. We were like a bunch of hicks from Memphis, but we were excited. We rode on a special train to Hollywood, and at every stop, fans were waiting. They loved Elvis, and he loved them back. It was a great ride. When we got to Hollywood, it was amazing. We stayed at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and I saw a hairbrush that cost $500. I thought it belonged to a movie star. We dressed up in dark suits, wore shades, and drove Elvis's Cadillac convertible down the Sunset Strip. We tried to look like millionaires, even though we were just making $35 a week. We were just having fun. At Paramount Studios, we met famous actors and directors. Norman Torog, who directed many of Elvis's movies, became a good friend. He understood us and our jokes. We also met Juliette Prowse, who was in G.I. Blues with Elvis. She was dating Frank Sinatra at the time, so we used to prank Elvis by yelling that Frank was coming. One time, Frank really was there, and Elvis was cool about it. Elvis dated Juliette for a while, but it didn't go anywhere. He was also dating Tuesday Weld. Hollywood was different, and Elvis was getting used to it. I was part of Elvis Presley's inner circle, the Memphis Mafia. Each of us had our roles, even if some people called us go-furs or hangers-on. Joe Esposito was the organizer, making sure everything ran smoothly, especially on movie sets. Red and I handled stunts and acted as stand-ins. Gene Smith took care of Elvis's wardrobe, and Charlie Hodge helped out with music and odd jobs. We were all there to support Elvis, but we also had a lot of fun. During the filming of G.I. Blues, my main job was to be Elvis's karate dummy. It was a weird but fun experience. Elvis was really into karate and would show off his moves. I had to fall for his punches, whether it was in a hotel room, a dressing room, or even on a concrete floor. Some days I ached all over, but it was worth it to see Elvis's enthusiasm. Elvis was in great shape and looked incredible. He was so fit that even the pills he and the boys took didn't slow him down. We were all into karate, and we would do demonstrations all over the studio, throwing each other around and breaking boards. At night, we partied at the house on Perugia Way, and on weekends, we played football in Beverly Glen. It was a wild time. One of Elvis's movies, Flaming Star, was intense. He played a half-breed Indian caught between two worlds. I remember Red playing an Indian that Elvis stabbed in a scene. It was brutal, but we were all in it together. Elvis even rode a maverick horse, which worried the producer, but Elvis insisted on doing it himself. He was a risk-taker, but he had a lot of respect from the crew. Despite the fun, there was a dark moment when some money and a diamond watch went missing. I was in charge of Elvis's jewel box, and I felt guilty, thinking everyone suspected me. Elvis made it clear he couldn't tolerate a thief, and I thought he might kick me out. It was a tough time, but the colonel came up with a clever plan to catch the thief, and I was cleared. The movies kept rolling, and so did the money. G.I. Blues was a huge hit, and the album sold 1 million copies. Elvis was back on set for Wild in the Country, where he got into a fight with his brother, played by Red. Again, Red ended up on his back, and he joked that he never won a fight against Elvis. The movie was a success, and so were the songs, but Elvis had some health issues during filming. He got boils on his rear end, and he even got drunk a couple of times to deal with the pain. One time, Hope Lange visited him and saw his boils, which was a funny and awkward moment. Elvis was dating a wardrobe girl named Nancy Sharp. We went on a trip to San Francisco, and something crazy happened. We were driving in Elvis's big white Cadillac, and some guys in another car started giving us the finger. Elvis told me to catch up to them, and when we did, he pulled out a Derringer and pointed it at the driver's head. It was a shock, but the guys drove off quickly. Elvis was a different person sometimes, especially when he had a little wine in him. By the time Blue Hawaii came around, Elvis had it all. He was a millionaire, had a beautiful girlfriend named Priscilla waiting for him in Memphis, and was surrounded by us, his loyal friends. Blue Hawaii was a massive success, and the soundtrack sold millions. The movie was fun, and the director, Norman Torog, let us do our thing. We were on Kauai, and one night, I skipped dinner to talk to some girls at the bar. I got pretty drunk on Mai Tais and walked back to the dining area. I saw a couple singing the Hawaiian wedding song on a bridge. I joined in, not realizing they were part of the floor show. Everyone in the dining room laughed, and the next day, Elvis told the others to keep me away from him. He was mad, even though he found it funny at first. It was a weird moment that strained our relationship. The tension peaked one night at Elvis's house on Perugia Way. We were all drinking, and Elvis was with Tuesday Weld and her friend Kay. I was talking to Kay, and Elvis kissed her, making it clear she was off limits. Later, Elvis thought I was saying something bad about him. He got angry, and things got physical. He hit me, and I was shocked. I told him I quit and left. Elvis followed me, looking regretful. He gave me some money and asked where I was going, but I was firm. I left, and the other guys were cool to me. It was a tough time, but it was a part of the crazy, wild life we lived with Elvis Presley. I remember the time Elvis and I had that flare-up. It was a rough patch, but things got better. Elvis had a way of making everything right, even when he didn't say sorry. He just did things that showed he cared, like when he got me into the Screen Extras Guild. There were a lot of people waiting to get in, but Elvis, being who he was, just fixed it for me. That's the kind of guy he was. Hanging around Hollywood, I got to meet a lot of interesting people. There was Charles Bronson, a quiet and serious guy. He didn't think much of Elvis's karate shows, but I don't think anyone ever heard Bronson say a bad word about anyone. Gig Young was another memorable one. He had a great sense of humor and a sharp wit. There was this one time when Elvis tried to trade his new Rolls-Royce for Elizabeth Montgomery. Gig just smiled and said, "Not bad, but the Rolls is a newer model." The Colonel, Elvis's manager, had a knack for making people do crazy things. He'd hypnotize us and make us do all sorts of funny stuff. I remember one time he made me go up to the director and tell him he was doing a lousy job. The crew thought I was nuts, but it was all in good fun. The Colonel could be a real joker sometime. Elvis dated a lot of leading ladies, but he always had his eye on the prize. Priscilla stayed in Memphis, and we were always there to keep things lively. By 1962, Elvis was starting to feel the boredom. He was making so many movies, and they weren't always the best. He'd complain about the scripts, but they never got better. The money kept coming, but the challenge was gone. That's when Elvis started to spend a lot of money and do a lot of wild things to keep the boredom away. There were times when things got a bit wild on set. I remember a scene in Fun in Acapulco where Elvis had to be carried by a bunch of guys. Every time they picked him up, one of them would grab him in a very private way. We had to get that guy off the set before he ruined the scene. Elvis was not happy about it. Kissin' Cousins was a fun movie, but it almost ended in disaster. We were driving down a mountain in a big Winnebago, and the brakes gave out. Elvis had to use the gears to slow down. It was a close call, but he was a great driver. If he wasn't, that would have been his last movie. Viva Las Vegas was a big deal. Elvis met Anne Margaret, and there was a lot of chemistry between them. They sang and danced together, and it was magical. But there was a guy on the set who was in love with Anne Margaret, and he tried to cut Elvis out of the shots. Elvis didn't like that, and the Colonel had to step in. Elvis wanted to do better movies, but the Colonel wanted to keep his image. Elvis was rich, but he had to follow the Colonel's plans. It was a tough time, but we always found a way to make it fun. That's what we did, the Memphis Mafia. We were there for Elvis, and he was always there for us.